there was this one concept that I found to be one of the most profound um, pieces of the podcast. Um, when I was watching the Hams and Chris Williamson podcast, they were just generally discussing this one concept where there was basically three sides to this one guy, and essentially three sides to every person that people really need to pay attention to. And these three sides were the dopamine version of yourself, the serotonin version of yourself, and the cortisol version of yourself. So each of us have all three of these within us, and I do believe it is our responsibility to go ahead and compartmentalize the activities that we have, or not necessarily activities, but compartmentalize the actions that we take into one of these three categories, so we know exactly what we're kind of diving into before we get into it. So, um, so for example, right, the dopamine version of us is probably going to be the things that maybe aren't the most fruitful things that we can do, but yet we do them because they bring us some type of enjoyment. And maybe a lot of this time it's not necessarily something that is, let's just say, worthwhile always. Like, yeah, so for example, maybe let's just say you're trying to maintain eating a healthy diet. Maybe this will look like eating some unhealthy food, right? Maybe getting into some sweets, maybe eating an excessive amount of sugar, right? That would be hitting the dopamine version of yourself. That would be a dopamine related action. Or maybe this looks like you spending excessive time on your phone as opposed to just reading a book or doing another activity that maybe isn't going to give you as much of a thrill or an excitement, but therefore it can reap you some benefits beyond that for sure, or beyond that moment for sure. Some of these things for me personally is like I said, watching videos, going on Instagram and Snapchat, same thing that I just mentioned. Seeing the views go up as well. I've been posting a lot more frequently, and seeing the views go up has definitely been something that definitely is that version, or like I pay attention to it, or I'm a little bit more like ultra conscious of that instead of paying attention to just the process in itself, right? Enjoying making the content, because realistically, what I clip is parts of this podcast, right? And with that being said, I can't necessarily I enjoy making the podcast, right? And I never want to get away from that, and I never want to do something that's going to take away from the enjoyment of the podcast, right? Um, and that potentially can be, like I said, paying attention to the views instead of paying attention to, like I said, what it takes. I think can definitely hinder a lot of people for sure. Or maybe this is the occasional drink or the occasional smoke, right? Or maybe this is getting off task, right? That could be that could be the dopamine version. Let's just say that, yeah, the dopamine version of myself. All right. And then there is, like I said, another aspect of this would be the serotonin version of myself, or like I said, serotonin version of yourself. And like I mentioned, right, within all these things, I want you to go ahead and specifically define when you're doing a certain action, what does this look like? Or like I said, what I did for myself is the dopamine version of myself. I wrote up a bunch of things where I'm like, this is definitely dipping into maybe the instant gratification, or maybe something that's really not as good for me, but therefore I'll do it occasionally, right? Or I'll try to limit it as much as I possibly can for many reasons, which I will discuss here soon. But like I mentioned, the serotonin version of yourself, for me personally, this is going to look like being a man of character and doing things that bring me wholesome enjoyment of life, that isn't really this instant gratification. And this is going on a walk with my girlfriend, hanging out with my boys, maybe getting a good workout, maybe doing some deep work, which is, like I said, maybe editing or doing a podcast, right? Maybe this looks like helping one of my friends, or maybe helping one of my family members develop a skill. Maybe this will look like playing basketball, right? Basketball is a huge passion of mine, and yeah, that definitely could be one as well. And then also just having good, wholesome conversation that allows me to develop my mind while also helping another person develop their own mind, right? Those are going to be things that, in my opinion, are being a man of character. And with that being said, obviously we can kind of see where we kind of want to be at, as opposed to where we could be at for sure. And then the last one, of course, like I said, make sure you're clear with this for yourself as well. This is going to be the cortisol version of myself, right? This is going to be dealing with the pressures of life, or maybe focusing on the pressures of life, or being ultra self critical about myself, or like I said, just being consumed by the stressors of life, right? allowing my focus to essentially detour into what I would deem to be more of a depressive, stressful state, right? And so, like I said, those are the three components of your personality. Those are the three components of the actions that you go ahead and take. So, like I had mentioned, right, observe your daily actions. Within your daily actions, what would those certain actions, what would they better align with? Would they better align with your serotonin version of yourself, which, like I said, for me personally, like I said, you need to define this for yourself, but this is just being a man of character, doing things that give you wholesome enjoyment of life, right? Or maybe it dips into the dopamine version of where, you probably shouldn't do it as much, and you're probably limited as much as you possibly can, and maybe you're not um, too good at self-governing yourself, so this can take over your entire life, and you'll be only doing these things. And as well with that, right? Or maybe it's the cortisol version of yourself, which is going to be, like I said, just dealing with the stressors of life, being anxious, being depressed, being, I would say, just filled with negative emotion and just dealing with the stressors of life, which of course is going to come up. And all of these things should be well balanced. But quite frankly, what I see is this: there's very, very few people that I've met where I can see within their character, and not only within their character, but their choice of action, where they're having a healthy balance of each of these things, or maybe, and like I said, also defining what is a healthy balance between these things, right? And I'll go and get into that right now in a minute. But one thing I want to mention that I think is very, very, very interesting, and this is not exclusive to this, but this is just an observation that I had made. Is I believe that you can only get cortisol from doing dopamine, or not. You can get cortisol, like I said, the cortisol, which is like the stressor, right? Essentially, you can dip into that when you have when you decide to express the dopamine version of yourself in excess, right? So, for example, right? Let's just say I like to just use this example. Let me see if I can use another one. Let's just say what brings you instant happiness is playing video games. It gives you instant happiness. It gives you a sense of, accomplishing something, gives you a sense of progress, right? Fine. Okay. But you know that you probably should be doing something else. You know that there's probably something that you could do, another habit that you could do, or maybe you need to do something, like literally something else. There's like a higher thing on the priority list, but playing video games really just gives you that instant happiness, and it feels good to play video games. So you neglect what you have to do, and you decide to do what you want to do, right? You decide to go ahead and enjoy this. You decide to go ahead and act in line with the dopamine version of yourself, right? When you decide to go ahead and do that, you start to neglect the things that you know you need to do, right? And when you decide to neglect the things that you know you need to do, it becomes a conflict of value within your own internal self, which is going to give you more worry, which is going to allow you to dip into the cortisol version of yourself, which is dealing with the stressors of life, in short, right? So like I said, I just found that to be an interesting observation, and that is something that I think is part of the reason why people stay depressed, right? Everybody has depressed moments of their life, right? There's things that happen. There's things that happen within this life that are less than ideal and maybe out of your control, right? But to stay in a depressed state is a choice of action. Is a choice. Yeah, I really think it's a choice of action. It is what you're placing your focus on, right? So like I had mentioned, right? Just observe the actions of people around you. I'm going to lay out a common thing that I see within most people, right? Within most people, they only really have two things that they go ahead and deal with. They're simply controlled by the things in which give them the happiness, the dopamine, right? They're simply controlled by those things. That's all they choose to go ahead and do. That's all they prioritize, right? And when they prioritize that, like I had mentioned, right, they know that they need to take care of other things. They know that they potentially have other goals within the back of their mind, but they do not act in accordance to those goals. So therefore, they start dealing with the cortisol version of themselves, and they only really have those two things, and they necessarily can't find the balance. So it's a vicious cycle, right? You're stressed, right? Life is going to give you stressors, right? You're going to be stressed. Okay, what is the one thing that these people think is going to relieve their stress? What can I do to make me temporarily happy right now? So they'll do something that makes them happy. Maybe they'll overindulge within eating, or maybe they'll have a few more desserts, or maybe they will start to play video games, or maybe they will do just something that you could be doing something potentially better, right? They'll go ahead and indulge within that thing, right? And then because they did that, life gets hard, so therefore they still have that stressors, and and then obviously from there, right? Oh, they start to get stressed. Oh, what's a better thing to do than to do a thing that makes you happy? And you see how it's this vicious cycle, right? But what you must understand is the people who are well balanced, they have found out how to properly balance the dopamine, the cortisol, and um, the cortisol, and the serotonin version of themselves, right? So, like I said, what brings you wholesome enjoyment and fulfillment within this life, right? What are the actions that you can take where after you do this, you feel like a better person for doing that, right? Like I had mentioned, I gave you some of my examples. Maybe this looks like getting a good workout. Maybe this looks like doing the work that you know you need to do and stop necessarily procrastinating on the work that you know you need to go ahead and do, right? And along with this, right, what are you doing and what are you placing your focus on? Are you placing your focus on the dopamine version of yourself, where you're simply just doing the things that you want to go ahead and do because it makes you happy? And quite frankly, that's not how life works. Doing the things that only make you temporarily happy is going to give you the highest of highs and also the lowest of lows of life, right? Or at least it potentially can, right? But if you're pursuing what I deem to be the most important of those two, of those three rather, which is going to be the serotonin version of yourself, it's going to allow you to have that more of that fulfillment